Whittington and his cat. This is an amazing story. I assumed it was written in the 30s through the 50s, but was shocked to learn that it was written in 1605. The Old English writing style usually makes things pretty difficult to read, but some of these paragraphs needed little to no translation. Also amazing is that I'd never heard of this story. It instantly became one of my favorites. So let me know what story you would suggest. Also, like and subscribe so we can keep the story going. Thank you. I hope you enjoy the story of Whittington and his cat. Whittington and his cat. In the reign of the famous King Edward III, there was a little boy called Dick Whittington. His father and mother died when he was very young, so he remembered nothing at all about them, and was left a ragged little fellow running about a country village. As poor Dick was not old enough to work, he was very poor. He got little to eat and sometimes nothing at all. This was because the people who lived in the village were very poor themselves. They could spare him little more than the potato peels, and now and then a hard crust of bread. Dick Whittington was a clever boy who always paid close attention to the conversations around him. On Sundays, he would listen to the farmers chatting near the churchyard before the service began. During the week, he could often be found leaning against the signpost outside the village tavern, overhearing travelers' stories as they passed through. Even when the barber shop was open, Dick eagerly absorbed the gossip and news shared by its customers. With this practice, Dick heard a great many very strange things about the great city called London. The foolish country people at that time thought that folks in London were all fine gentlemen and ladies, and that there was singing and music there all day long, and that the streets were all paved with gold. One day, a large wagon and 8 horses, all with bells on their heads, drove through the village while Dick was standing by the signpost. He thought that this wagon must be going to the fine town of London, so he grew the courage to ask the wagoner to let him walk beside the wagon. As soon as the wagoner heard that poor Dick had no father or mother, and saw by his tattered clothes that he was very poor, feeling sorry for him, he told the boy he could if he wanted, and they set off together. I could never find out how the little boy managed to get food and drink on the road, how he could walk so far, for it was a long way, nor what he did at night for a place to lie down to sleep. Perhaps some good-natured people in the towns that he passed through, when they saw he was a poor little tattered boy, gave him something to eat. Perhaps the wagoner let him get into the wagon at night and take a nap on the large parcels in the wagon. However, Dick managed to get safely to London. He was in such a hurry to see the fine streets paved with gold that I am afraid he did not even stay to thank the kind wagoner. Instead, he ran off as fast as his legs would carry him through many of the streets, thinking every moment to come to those that were paved with gold. Dick had seen a pound 3 times in his own little village and remembered what a deal of money it brought in change. He thought he had nothing to do but to take up some little bits of the pavement and should then have as much money as he could wish for. Poor Dick ran till he was tired and had quite forgotten his friend the wagoner. At last, finding it grow dark and that every way he turned he saw nothing but dirt instead of gold, he sat down in a dark corner and cried himself to sleep. Dick slept in the streets all night. The next morning, being very hungry, he got up and walked around and asked everybody he met to give him a halfpenny to keep him from starving. But nobody stayed to answer him, and only 2 or 3 gave him a halfpenny, so the poor boy was soon quite weak from lack of food. At last, a good-natured looking gentleman saw how hungry he looked. "Why don't you go to work, my lad?" said he to Dick. "Then I would, but I do not know how to find work," answered Dick. "If you are willing, come along with me," said the gentleman, and he took him to a hayfield, where Dick worked briskly and lived merrily till the hay was made. After this, he found himself as bad off as before, being almost starved again. He laid himself down at the door of Mr. Fitzwarren, a rich merchant. Here he was soon seen by the cook, who was an ill-tempered creature and happened just then to be very busy preparing dinner for her master and mistress. She screamed at poor Dick, "What business have you there, you lazy rogue? Nothing else but beggars. If you don't leave, we will see how you will like a face full of dishwater. I have some here hot enough to make you jump." Just at that time, Mr. Fitzwarren himself came home for dinner. When he saw a dirty, tattered boy lying at the door, he said to him, "Why do you lay there, my boy? You seem old enough to work. I am afraid you are inclined to be lazy." "No, indeed, sir," said Dick to him. "That is not the case, for I would work with all my heart, but I do not know anybody, and I believe I am very sick for the want of food." "Poor fellow. Get up. Let me see what ails you." Dick now tried to rise, but was obliged to lie down again, being too weak to stand. He had not eaten any food for 3 days and was no longer able to run about and beg a halfpenny of people in the street. So the kind merchant ordered him to be taken into the house, have a good dinner given him, and be kept to do what dirty work he was able for the cook. Dick would have lived very happily with this good family if it had not been for the ill-natured cook. She always found fault and scolded him from morning to night. Besides, she was so fond of basting that when she had no meat to baste, she would baste poor Dick's head and shoulders with a broom. At last her ill usage of him was told to Alice, Mr. Fitzwarren's daughter, who told the cook she would be turned away if she did not treat him better. The ill humor of the cook was now a little amended, but besides this, Dick had another hardship to get over. His bed stood in an attic, where there were so many holes in the floor and the walls that every night he was tormented with rats and mice. A gentleman having given Dick a penny for cleaning his shoes, he thought he would buy a cat with it. The next day he saw a girl with a cat, and asked her if she would let him have it for a penny. The girl said she would, and at the same time told him the cat was an excellent mouser. Dick hid his cat in the attic, and always took care to carry a part of his dinner to her. In a short time, he had no more trouble with the rats and mice, but slept quite soundly every night. Soon after this, the master prepared for his ship's departure. He decided that, just as he hoped for good fortune, his servants should also have a chance at it. He gathered them in the parlor and asked each one what they would like to send with the ship, giving them an opportunity to contribute something for their own benefit and luck. They all had something that they were willing to venture, except poor Dick, who had neither money nor goods and therefore could send nothing. For this reason he did not come into the parlor with the rest, but Miss Alice guessed what the problem was and ordered him to be called in. She then said she would lay down some money for him from her own purse, but the father told her this would not do. It must be something of his own. When poor Dick heard this, he said he had nothing but a cat, which he bought for a penny some time ago since off a little girl. "Fetch your cat then, my good boy," said Mr. Fitzwarren, "and let her go." Dick went upstairs and brought down his cat, with tears in his eyes, and gave her to the captain. He said he should now be kept awake again all night by the rats and mice. Everyone laughed at Dick's odd venture, and Miss Alice, who felt pity for the poor boy, gave him some money to buy another cat. This, and many other marks of kindness shown him by Miss Alice, made the ill-tempered cook jealous of the poor boy. She was more cruel than ever and always teased him for sending his cat to sea. She asked him if he thought his cat would sell for as much money as would buy a stick to beat him. At last, poor Dick could not bear this outrage any longer and decided to run away. He packed up his few things and started very early in the morning on All Hallows Day, which is the 1st of November. He walked as far as Holloway, and there he sat down on a stone, which to this day is called Whittington Stone, and began to think to himself which road he should take as he proceeded onwards. While he was thinking what he should do, the bells of Bow Church, which at that time had only 6, began to ring, and he fancied their sound seemed to say to him, "Turn again, Whittington, Lord Mayor of London." "Lord Mayor of London," he said to himself. "Why, to be sure, I would put up with almost anything now to be Lord Mayor of London and ride in a fine coach when I grow to be a man. Well, I will go back and think nothing of the cuffing and scolding of the old cook if I am to be Lord Mayor of London at last." Dick went back and was lucky enough to get into the house and start work before the old cook came downstairs. The ship with the cat on board was a long time at sea. It was at last driven by the winds on a part of the coast of Barbary, where the only people were the Moors, that the English had never known before. The people then came in great numbers to see the sailors from another country. They were treated very civilly, and when they became better acquainted, were very eager to buy the fine things that the ship was loaded with. When the captain saw this, he sent patterns of the best things he had to the king of the country. He was so pleased with them that he sent for the captain to the palace. Here they were placed, as it is the custom of the country, on rich carpets marked with gold and silver flowers. The king and queen were seated at the upper end of the room, and a number of dishes were brought in for dinner. They had not sat long when a vast number of rats and mice rushed in, helping themselves from almost every dish. The captain wondered at this, and asked if these vermin were not very unpleasant. "Oh yes," said they, "very offensive, and the king would give half his treasure to be freed of them, for they not only destroy his dinner, as you see, but they assault him in his chamber and even in bed, so that he is obliged to be watched while he is sleeping for fear of them." The captain jumped for joy. He remembered poor Whittington and his cat. He told the king he had a creature on board the ship that would dispatch all these vermin immediately. The king's heart heaved so high at the joy that this news gave him that his turban dropped off his head. "Bring this creature to me," says he. "Vermin are dreadful in a court, and if she will perform what ye say, I will load your ship with gold and jewels in exchange for her." The captain, who knew his business, took this opportunity to set forth the merits of Miss Puss. He told his majesty that it would be inconvenient to part with her, as when she was gone, the rats and mice might destroy the goods in the ship, but to oblige his majesty, he would fetch her. "Run now, please," said the queen. "I am impatient to see the dear creature." Away went the captain to the ship, while another dinner was prepared. He put the cat under his arm, and arrived at the place soon enough to see the table full of rats. When the cat saw them, her instincts kicked in, jumping out of the captain's arms, and in a few minutes laid almost all the rats and mice dead at her feet. The rest of them in their fright scampered away to their holes. The king and queen were quite charmed to get so easily rid of such plagues, and desired that the creature who had done them so great a kindness might be brought to them for inspection. Upon which the captain called, "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty," and she came to him. He then presented her to the queen, who was afraid to touch a creature who had made such havoc among the rats and mice. However, when the captain stroked the cat and called, "Kitty, kitty," the queen also touched her and cried, "Putty, putty," for she had not learned English. He then put her down on the queen's lap, where she, purring, played with her majesty's hand, and then sung herself to sleep. The king, having seen the exploits of Mrs. Puss and being informed that she was with young and would stock the whole country, bargained with the captain for the whole ship's cargo, and then gave him 10 times as much for the cat as all the rest amounted to. The captain then took leave of the royal party and set sail with a fair wind for England, and after a happy voyage, he arrived safe in London. One morning Mr. Fitzwarren had just come to his counting house and seated himself at the desk when somebody came tap at the door. "Who's there?" says Mr. Fitzwarren. "A friend," answered the other.
"I come to bring you good news of your ship."
The merchant, bustling up instantly, opened the door, and who should be seen waiting but the captain and factor, with a cabinet of jewels and a bill of lading, for which the merchant lifted up his eyes and thanked heaven for sending him such a prosperous voyage. They then told the story of the cat, and showed the rich present that the king and queen had sent for her to poor Dick. As soon as the merchant heard this, he called out to his servants. Mr. Fitzwarren now showed himself to be a good man, for when some of his servants said so great a treasure was too much for him, he answered, "God forbid I should deprive him of the value of a single penny." He then sent for Dick, who at that time was scouring pots for the cook and was quite dirty. Mr. Fitzwarren ordered a chair to be set for him, and so he began to think they were making sport of him. He begged them not to play tricks with a poor simple boy, but to let him get back to his work. "Indeed, Mr. Whittington," said the merchant, "we are being honest with you, and I most heartily rejoice too the news these gentlemen have brought you. The captain has sold your cat to the king of Barbary and brought you in return for her more riches than I possess in the whole world. I wish you may long enjoy them." Mr. Fitzwarren then told the men to open the great treasure they had brought with them, and said, "Mr. Whittington has nothing to do but to put it in some place of safety." Poor Dick hardly knew how to behave himself for joy. He begged his master to take what part of it he pleased, since he owed it all to his kindness. "No, no," answered Mr. Fitzwarren. "This is all yours, and I know you'll use it well." Dick next asked his mistress, and then Miss Alice, to accept a part of his good fortune, but they would not. They instead told him they felt great joy at his good success. But this poor fellow was too kind-hearted to keep it all to himself. So he made a present to the captain, the mate, and the rest of Mr. Fitzwarren's servants, and even to the ill-natured old cook. After this, Mr. Fitzwarren advised him to send for a proper tradesman and get himself dressed like a gentleman. She told him he was welcome to live in his house till he could provide himself with a better. When Whittington's face was washed, his hair combed, his hat placed, and he was dressed in a nice suit of clothes, he was as handsome and genteel as any young man who visited at Mr. Fitzwarren's. Miss Alice, who had once been so kind to him and thought of him with pity, now looked upon him as fit to be her sweetheart, and the more so, no doubt, because Whittington was now always thinking what he could do to oblige her and making her the prettiest presents that could be. Mr. Fitzwarren soon saw their love for each other and proposed to join them in marriage, and to this they both readily agreed. A day for the wedding was soon fixed, and they were attended to church by the Lord Mayor, the Court of Aldermen, the sheriffs, and a great number of the richest merchants in London, whom they afterwards treated with a very rich feast. History tells us that Mr. Whittington and his lady lived in great splendor and were very happy. They had several children. He was Sheriff of London, also Mayor, and received the honor of knighthood by Henry V. The figure of Sir Richard Whittington with his cat in his arms, carved in stone, was to be seen till the year 1780 over the archway of the old prison of Newgate that stood across Newgate Street.